Faintness came back, and she closed her eyes again and lay motionless, forgetful of time, place, or hunger. Bunty sped across the paddock on winged feet. The sight of his father near the stables gave him a momentary shock, and brought his own trouble to mind, but he shook it off again and hurried on. The pantry door was locked. Martha, the cook, kept it in that condition generally on account of his own sinful propensities for making away with her tarts and cakes. It was only by skilful stratagem he could ever get in, as he remembered dejectedly. But Judy's hunger! Nothing to eat since yesterday morning! He remembered with a feeling of pain even now the horrible sinking sensation he had experienced last week, when for punishment he had been sent to bed without his tea. And Judy had foregone 3 meals. He shut his lips tightly, and a light of almost heroic resolve came into his eyes. Round at the side of the house was the window to the pantry. He had often gazed longingly up at it, but had never ventured to attempt the ascent, for there was a horrible cactus creeper up the wall. But now, for Judy's sake, he would do it or die. He marched round the house and up to the side window. No one was about, the whole place seemed very quiet. Martha, as he had seen, was cooking in the kitchen, and the other girl was whitening the front veranda. He gave one steady look at the great spiky thorns, and the next minute was climbing up among them. Oh, how they pierced and tore him! There was a great jagged wound up one arm, his left stocking was ripped away, and a deep red scratch showed across his leg. His hands were bleeding and quivering with pain. But he had reached the sill, and that was everything. He pushed up the narrow window and, with much difficulty, forced his little fat body through. Then he dropped down onto a shelf and lowered himself gingerly onto the floor. There was no time to stay and look at his many hurts. He merely regarded the biggest scratch with rueful eyes, and then began to look round for provender. The pantry was remarkably empty, not a sign of cakes, not a bit of jelly, not a remnant of fowl anywhere. He cut a great piece off a loaf and carefully wrapped some butter in a scrap of newspaper. There was some corned beef on a dish, and he cut off a thick lump and rolled it up with the remains of a loquat tart. These parcels he disposed of down the loose front of his sailor coat, filling up his pockets with sultanas, citron peel, currants, and such dainties as the store bottles held. And then he prepared to make his painful retreat. He climbed upon the shelf once more, put his head out of the window, and gave a look of despair at the cactus. And even as he knelt, there sounded behind him the sharp click of a turning key. He looked wildly round, and there was Martha in the doorway, and to his utter horror she was talking to his father, who was in the passage just beyond. "Row's imprecation, or arnica," the captain was saying. "It's probably in this pantry, my good girl, because it is the last place I should expect it to be in. I left it on my bedroom mantelpiece, but somebody has seen fit to meddle with it. Why, in the name of all that is mysterious country, let my things alone." "And what should I be after moving it for?" Martha retorted. "I don't mix the pastry with it to make it lightsome, leastway not ordinarily." She tossed her head, and the action revealed the small, kneeling, terrified figure at the window. Now the door was only half open, and her master was standing just beside it outside, so she only had the benefit of the spectacle. Twice she opened her mouth to speak, but Bunty made such frantic, imploring faces at her that she closed it again, and even began to examine the bottles on the shelf near the door to give the boy an opportunity of retreat. 1 minute and he would have been safe. 1 minute and he would have been in the thick of the cactus that had quite lost its terrors. But the fates were too strong for him. And all because Martha Tomlinson's shoe was on at the heel. In turning round it twisted a little under her, and in trying to recover her balance she put out one hand. And in putting out one hand she knocked over a jug. And the jug communicated its shock to dish, which toppled over, and coolly pushed the great basin of milk off the shelf onto the floor. I don't know if you have ever tried to clean a board floor after milk, but I am sure you can imagine it would be a disagreeable task, especially if you had scrubbed it well only that morning. It was hardly to be wondered at, therefore, that Martha, in her profound irritation at the disaster, turned angrily round, and, pointing to the figure now stuck in the window, demanded in an exasperated tone whether the blessed saints could stand that dratted boy any longer, for she couldn't, so there. The captain took an angry step into the pantry and gave a roar of command for Bunty to come down. The boy dropped in an agony of dread and shrinking. "Always his hands are picking and stealing and his tongue a lying," said Martha Tomlinson, gazing unkindly at the unhappy child. 2, 3, 4, 5 angry cuts from the riding whip in the captain's hands, and Bunty had ducked under his arm and fled howling down the passage and out of the back door. Away across the paddocks he went, sobbing at every step, but hugely commending himself for bearing all this for someone else's sake. He could hardly have believed, had anyone told him previously, that he could have done anything so absolutely noble, and the thought comforted him even while the cuts and scratches smarted. He tried to stifle his sobs as he reached the shed, and even stuffed half a handful of currants into his mouth towards that end. But it was a very tearful, scratched, miserable face that bobbed up the opening near Judy again. She did not move, though her eyes were half open, and he knelt down and shook her shoulder gently. "Here's some things, Judy. Ain't you going to eat them?" She shook her head very slightly. "Have some corned beef or some currants. There's some peel too, if you'd rather." She shook her head again. "Do take them away," she said with a little moan. A look of blank disappointment stole over his small, heated face. "And I've half killed myself to get them. Well, you are a mean girl," he said. "Oh, do go away," Judy moaned, moving her head restlessly from side to side. "Oh, how my feet ache, no, my head, and my side. Oh, I don't know what it is." "I got hit here and here," Bunty said, indicating the places, and wiping away tears of keen self-pity with his coat sleeve. "I'm scratched all over with that beastly old cactus." "Do you suppose there are many miles more?" Judy said, in such a quick way that all the words seemed to run into each other. "I've walked hundreds and hundreds, and I haven't got home yet. I suppose it's because the world's round, and I'll be walking in at the school gate again presently." "Don't be an idiot," Bunty said gruffly. "You'll be sure and certain, Marion, never to breathe a word of it. I've trusted you, and if you keep faith, I can go home and come back and no one will know. And lend me 2 shillings, can you? I've not got much left. Bunty, you selfish little pig, you might get me some milk. I've been begging and begging of you for hours, and my head is going to Catherine wheels for want of it." "Have some corned beef, Judy dear. Oh, Judy, don't be so silly and horrid after I nearly got killed for you," Bunty said, trying with trembling fingers to stuff a piece into her mouth. The little girl rolled over and began muttering again. 77 miles, she said. "That makes 1177. And 6 the day before because my foot had a blister. That's 1183. And if I walk 10 miles a day, I shall get home in 1183 times 10. That's 1,000 and... Oh, what is it? Whatever is it? Bunty, you horrid little pig, can't you tell me what it is? My head aches too much to work, and 1,000 and something days, that's a year, 2 years, 2 years, 3 years before I get there. Oh, Pip, Meg, 3 years. Oh, Esther, ask him to let me come home. 3 years, years. The last word was almost shrieked, and the child struggled to her feet and tried to walk. Bunty caught her arms and held her. "Let me go, can't you?" she said hoarsely. "I shall never get there at this rate. 3 years and all those miles." She pushed him aside and tried to walk across the loft, but her legs tottered under her and she fell down in a little senseless heap. "Meg, I'll fetch Meg," said the little boy in a trembling, alarmed voice, and he slipped down the opening and hastened up to the house. End of chapter 10.